Welcome. So the broadcast will start at the top of the hour here in just a couple more minutes. Thank you very much for joining us today.
All right, and so everybody sees my screen here, the people strategy title.
Yes.
Sure do.
Good.
We'll be starting in about 1 more minute. Welcome, everyone. So good morning. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion on the People Strategy Forum with our leading experts deciding how to help us with recovery of the COVID-19. So hello, my name is Shar Miller. I am a talent management consultant and people strategist with CompTeam. I also am a founder and owner of a company called Rocky Mountain Health Advocates, and I also provide career coaching with HR with a Heart. I'm also pleased to be joined with Sam Reeve, who's the CEO and founder of CompTeam, and also with Lisa Jackson, who is a keynote speaker and a culture change strategist with Corporate Culture Pros. So thank you so much. And before I introduce today's speakers, I just want to thank you for joining our conversation today. We are going to have a very enlightening session today, and we really look forward to your participation. And so today we'd like you to join us with the chats and the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and really engage in the conversation today. Just to give you an idea that we will post all of these presentations on our compteam.net, where you can listen to prior sessions that we've had on the People Strategy Forum, as well as today's session. Also, we encourage you to join our next session. So Sam will be sending you a registration link for next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. And also, if any of you have some questions or commentary, we will be happy to follow up with you today and answer any of your questions. So today we are going to go through a couple of great topics. And so one of our topics is creating a meaningful employee value proposition in time of crisis with Sumit, Singla. And in addition, we will be joined with Brian O'Neill, who will be discussing how leadership development programs can adapt to the future of the normal. And so we'd love for you to participate in these conversations with us today. We have a very interactive dialogue. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sumit. Sumit?
Thank you, Shar. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. I'm really excited to be talking about a topic that's very, very close to my heart, and that's the creation of a meaningful EVP. In times of crisis, so one of the questions I've been asked by some of my clients is, shouldn't people just be grateful to be hanging on to their jobs? I mean, why does an employer need a value proposition? I'm employing you, I'm paying you. Is that not enough for you? And even if I'm giving you a pay cut, at least you're being able to pay some or most of your bills. But my belief is that there's no right or wrong time to create an EVP. In fact, this might just be the best time, which separates the best and the rest. So it's a great time for employers to come together to look at what they're doing to offer to their employees and future employees, and how do they go about articulating a strong value proposition which sets them apart. So let's first just spend a minute or so trying to decode what exactly is an employer value proposition. So it's what sets an employer apart in the market, and it talks about what kind of experience they offer, not only to the existing employees, but also to any candidate in the pipeline and also people they're trying to attract. So LinkedIn data points to 65 to 70% of job seekers being passive job seekers. So they're difficult to dislodge, and they would only be interested in listening to potential job offers if it's a absolutely phenomenal offer. So they're not looking out for jobs. You've got to work hard to dislodge them from wherever they are. Um,
So Sumit, really quick, and just on EVP, when we're talking about the value proposition, how do you think that, you know, when we're thinking about the definition there, has that definition changed in this recent environment as far as how we should be approaching EVP, or how companies should think about, you know, what is the definition of the EVP?
so I think in case somebody does not have an EVP, it's a good time to start thinking about one. But like the second part of the slide says, Sam, an EVP isn't really a short-term initiative. So you can't really have a COVID-specific EVP, or we can't really create an EVP to address only COVID. It's more of bringing the values that already exist to life and seeing how exactly companies can deal with the current crisis. So um, which is why a lot of the really leading organizations, they're actually doing a lot towards improving employee well-being and reassuring people that your jobs are safe, your health is safe, your money is as safe as it can be, and we are going nowhere, we want you to go nowhere, so we're completely with you.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore an EVP is really a lot more than simply fancy marketing and smart presentations and fancy brochures.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are some of the proven benefits of a strong value proposition?
So the numbers speak for themselves, and one of the biggest is the fact that you're likely to have almost zero or significantly reduced attrition thanks to an EVP. When people feel they're being compensated adequately, when they feel somebody is investing in their career, and when they associate with the mission of an organization. So it's very easy for a drug manufacturer to say our objective is to make money by selling drugs to sick people. That's not how they articulate their mission. So the mission is articulated as that you're contributing to global well-being and health, and the health and happiness of every single human on the planet. And that's something, if you strongly relate to, you feel like joining the organization on that mission.
Oh, I noticed on this next slide here, you have a couple of examples of EVP benefits. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Oh, definitely. In fact, the favorite one here is the first one, Diageo. And what better than an alcohol manufacturer to bring people together, right? So if you're not familiar with the name of the firm itself, they've got some great brands like Smirnoff, Johnny Walker, and Bailey's. So Diageo decided that with a lot more of millennials coming into the workforce, they really need to figure something else out for the 21st century. What worked in the last century is no longer relevant now, and they need to see how to really break down the silos that exist and how to make departments work better together. So the first step they undertook was to look at their audience. Who are the people? Why are they leaving, and why is it costing the organization millions every year? So they decided after a survey and after listening to people that the millennial or the Gen Z employees don't really want a hierarchy. So they created a gig kind of a setup within the organization where they said, we'll approach almost every task as a short-term project. We'll bring cross-functional teams together, and we'll largely let them self-manage rather than reporting into managers and senior managers and vice presidents and so on. So while they do have that sense of control, but the larger idea is to let people feel more accountable and more in control of what they're doing day to day. Also creating smaller teams so that people can bond with each other better and build professional and social cohesion. So that's something which they decided to do. Um, In addition, they looked at the KPIs they had and how they could make things more efficient for their own employees. To give you an example, um, their internal IT function was very slow, like in a lot of large firms. And they figured that the IT function was being tracked on the number of tickets they were solving. So, on a little bit of a deeper dive, they found that even if you go to an IT person with a small question saying, I need to figure out how to remove animation from a PowerPoint slide, the IT person would say, log a ticket, we'll talk then. So it was unnecessarily slowing down productivity, and therefore they figured it would be a good idea to break this down and make the KPIs stronger and more aligned to an agile organization. So these were some of the things they did. They also married the customer promise to some of the things they were doing. So they donated breathalyzers to the police force. They ran campaigns saying responsible drinking is a good thing. Don't drink and drive. And um, so obviously it would benefit an alcohol company if we all stayed alive longer to drink more, right? So that's what they tried to do, and um, it worked well. So they were able to reduce their attrition rate to almost one third.
Wow.
And the other examples here are similar as well. So I won't really go into too much detail on those ones, but the idea being diagnosis and listening from the people who matter. So listening to employees and candidates, um, and then trying to re-engineer the entire process with the support of the leadership and the HR teams
Mhm. I
to
think one
attract and
one
retain the right talent. Sorry,
I
Sumit.
think one point is also taking action in times when things are silent. I mean, the big story with Hilton Hotels right now is we all know that they're helping, house medical professionals during this pandemic, and so they don't go home and infect their families. But one thing that they started out with is a story is when they had empty hotels and they sent their people home because they didn't need them to work, cleaning and so forth, is that they lit up their empty rooms to deliver messages to the passerbys. I guess one message was a big heart, another one was hope, and just things like that can deliver the thinking or giving back or trying to deliver a message of inspiration, even in times of inaction, when you're not able to run your business. And so that really brought a lot of their employees to be more connected, to have more value towards the organization. So there's always something that can be thought of.
Absolutely. And in fact, interesting that you picked a hotel example, because one of my favorite industries, and in fact, the next story is a little about hotels as well. So the Ritz-Carlton statement is, so what they tell their employees is that we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. So it's not your ordinary regular people serving some of the richest or some of the fanciest people on the planet. It's more like we're ladies and gentlemen, and we're simply serving other people like us. So and a lot of world-class hotels practice this kind of a promise to everyone, which is why engagement across the hotel industry is at an all-time high. So it's not an easy job. You deal with a lot of tantrums, you deal with a lot of difficult people, but you know your employer's got your back. So
Mhm.
worldwide, the hotel industry, the top hotels tend to have the highest ever engagement rates. Um, and
Uh, and I think
moving
you
on from
mentioned here in
there.
this next slide is how the EVP brings the company values to life. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, absolutely. So, like I mentioned, the EVP is the connecting point between the customer promise and the employee promise. And um, a lot of organizations now are realizing that the customer and the employee promise are interlinked and interrelated. So Adobe recently merged the head of customer experience role with the head of employee experience role as well, realizing that unless your employees have a world-class experience, that's not going to translate into the best of experiences for your customers. And the horizontal part of this slide talks about how the core values or the vision and the mission of the organization, as well as what the organization wants to do in the future. So what's their strategy? What would you like to do to get ahead? What kind of people strategy? So who are the people you're looking at? What kind of diverse groups of employees are you looking to attract to yourself? And what are they likely to demand? So that goes into fine tuning your HR process right from hire to retire. So actually, even before you bring somebody on board, the way you interact with them, the way you promise things to them, um, it's vital to getting them on board. And companies like the Ritz-Carlton, companies like Disney, Apple, they've all cracked this code. So another a non-example that I'd like to share here is so when Jeff Bezos started Amazon, um, the company wasn't called Amazon. So he was trying to figure out what to call a company with a really aggressive, go-getter kind of a culture. And he decided that the company would be called relentless.com. In fact, he registered the domain name without telling his executive team. Even today, if you type in relentless.com into your browser, you will get redirected to amazon.com. So they dissuaded him and told him it's a terrible idea. That's not what you want to be known as to future employees. And
yeah, I think
thankfully he listened.
So that's a great story. I think that a big thing we talk about at Comp Team a lot is the business value chain, as far as is, you know, understanding what the customer needs and wants, and what they're going to drive loyalty with, and ensuring that the products are designed around that. But a big concept here is making sure that the customer value proposition is aligned with the employee value proposition. You know, those pieces are equally important in this equation, especially as we go into the future. So yeah, I think this is a great call out. Thanks, Sumit.
Sure. And so far we've spoken about some of the warm, fuzzy parts of an EVP and agreed largely that it's a great thing to have. But what are some of the tangible, measurable components that you can actually see? So they can be broken down into three buckets. The first one being the functional or the most tactical parts of it. So how much are you getting paid? What's the overall work environment like? What kind of tools and resources? So especially for certain technical people, they'd like to work on cutting edge technology. They'd like to work on some of the fanciest tools they can get their hands on. What kind of career does the organization promise? And also, what are the non-monetary and monetary benefits that you've got access to? The second one here is the emotional part of it. So what is your sense of pride or belief in the organizational values? Do they really align with your personal values and your sense of belonging as well? What's the image of the organization in the external market? And would you want to be associated with that? The third one is the cultural part of it. So what do your daily work conditions translate into? Are you well respected? Are you cared for? Do you feel the love and the care? So to give you an example, how this is measured is one of the questions on one of the Gallup surveys is, I've got a best friend at work. So on the face of it, it's got nothing to do with your productivity or what you're delivering, but they track it to figure out whether your daily work conditions and your HR processes and the overall culture is supportive of what you're doing or not. One important call out here is the alumni experience part of it. And companies like Accenture and Deloitte really have engineered this to absolute brilliance. So they conduct various kinds of alumni events, which are virtual or face-to-face as well. So they have lunch sessions, they invite alumni. Whenever there's a new role that's on offer, they tend to reach out to alumni first and say that this is something exciting that we've got for you. Would you be interested in coming back and exploring this role? So let's just have a chat. We can decide later whether you want to come in or not. And it helps them in getting an engaged set of people. It also helps them in closing positions much faster than other people normally would.
Yeah,
So
that's great to ensure. I mean, haven't really explored that how these are broken down, but this is I like how you've put these three together: the functional, emotional, and cultural. So I believe we have a question, a couple questions in the chat we can get to really quick. Lisa, can you come on and let us know what those questions?
Yes, yeah. Howard Nizowitz, I hope I, Nicewitz, Nicewitz,
Nice.
Nicewitz. If I didn't master that too bad, Howard. Will this be harder to achieve as many more workers will prefer to continue to work from home? And there was another sort of follow-up question with the whole idea of like, are we, I'm going to get the actual question just so I can word it properly. So the working from home thing is kind of a theme here, and is the employee value proposition really still all that important when there's a bunch of people who are just looking for work, regardless of the employee experience? So those are kind of two sides of a coin a little bit.
I think that's a great one. And my answer to that would definitely be yes. And there are organizations that are trying to bring the cultural pillar to life, even when we're working remotely stuck at home. So companies like GE, they've got something called a happy hour where teams are encouraged to spend an hour together every Friday. And it's absolutely forbidden to bring up work topics. So the idea is to get to know each other. Of course, you've got to peek into each other's house right behind you. So everyone's got dogs and cats and kids moving around, or their own partners. And you're encouraged to bring your families into the call just to say hi as well. Similarly, Microsoft actually calls them water cooler conversations. So the great thing is they've got their own platform called Microsoft Teams as well. So they've enabled water cooler conversations on that, where you can simply take time out and you're supposed to report back on whether you had a water cooler conversation with your team or not. So I think despite us living virtually for the last 6 or 8 weeks, this element is becoming stronger. And just to add on to that, there are companies like Accenture, 400,000 people across the world. A lot of them attended office only on the first day when they had to collect their induction packs. And since then, they only have to go to office once a quarter, or once in 6 months to do their bills, because sadly the expense process is a little broken and cumbersome, at least in the country that I'm in. So
yeah, so this is a quick story. I was just coaching a small client yesterday, and they arranged a meeting, and they're not used to working remotely, and they're just getting used to that, and they arranged a meeting. They had everybody log in or call into freeconferencecall.com. And I was like, and so people join the call, and they're talking over one another because they can't see each other. They don't know who's on the call. And, of course we went back to those old protocols that say, okay, announce who's speaking, and then tell us what you want to talk about. And so everybody's going, oh, this is Henry, or this is Sally, and so-and-so. And then, and so the thing is that imagine how cumbersome that environment is, and how easy it is to just upgrade your services to a platform such as Zoom, where you can see people, or even if people don't share their video, who's on the call, and you're not jumping or falling over each other, because people can raise their hand to ask a question. So that's part of the value proposition now, and you're at home, is how can we make work easier, not harder? And so finding those simple solutions there can make a big difference.
absolutely. Thank you, Sam. So yeah, the interesting thing which research, so this is Gartner research carried out over nearly 30,000 people across the globe. So compensation is important, but it's not the only factor which makes an organization attractive. So vacation, health benefits, the overall stability, and the assurance that the company isn't really disappearing down the drain tomorrow. What kind of opportunities exist? interestingly, respect is a very, very important factor. So do you feel well respected and cared for at work, or is it more like just turning up, earning your daily bread, and coming back home, irrespective of how you're being treated? Work-life balance is second only to compensation, so that's an interesting one. And my prediction is that it'll grow further and probably beat compensation post-COVID, as people realize that balance is a lot more important than just the money that you're making. So
Right.
I find this research very interesting, and just goes to highlight that compensation or pay is important, not solely so.
Yeah, for those out there that don't know me, I mean, I am a pay expert. So I spent a lot of my career in making sure that compensation is right for companies and the right levels and so forth. But that's the main reason why I got to know Shar and Lisa and all those great HR professionals out there, because, pay is not the only thing. It needs to be right, and it needs to be at the right level, and it's very expensive. So we need to make sure that it's managed correctly. But if we really want to make sure that people are engaged and that we can retain that talent long term, we have to look at these other factors. The employee value proposition is critical, and it needs to be improved and realigned all the time.
Absolutely.
So Sumit, tell us what is the process to create the EVP?
So fairly straightforward on the face of it, Sam. But of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So step one is diagnosis, and the best people to hear from are the stakeholders. So who are you trying to attract to your organization? What's their view about you and some of your competitors, and how do you rate on various parameters? So something like what we saw in the last slide. In addition, hearing from some people who are already part of the organization, and also some who've quit. So if possible, it's a good idea to interview people who've left recently to figure out what could have made them stay. Um, and once we've got comprehensive feedback, the next step would be to rethink and figure out what really does our brand stand for. So what do we want to be known for? Is it the opportunity to work with a cutting edge um, technology company? Is it social good? So what in one line is our mission statement? Or if HBR were to write an article about our organization tomorrow and our employer brand, what would be the headline of that article? That's what the rethink tries to accomplish. And then what's the gap? So is it very, very aspirational, or is it a huge delta from our current state to the desired state? Or can we take some steps? Can we figure out how does our current state lead us to our desired state? So we plot the gap and identify the steps that will make us get there. And finally, what is the process? Who will be our change champions? And so step 4 is more like a change management exercise, really, to figure out how do we get from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
And
really like this
that's
a
how you
lot.
get an EVP.
Yeah, I really like this a lot, Sumit. I was talking, or actually, I had a conversation this morning just on this. It was just about the old idea, of course, of thinking to the future, and so that and working backwards so we can actually accomplish our goals. And in this particular situation where there's been a shock to the market, it's time for us to relook at our employee value proposition to ensure that it's the right one for the future. And so I really like how this is put together. First, we need to diagnose and really understand how we align our customers and our employee needs and wants and so forth, and then rethink on how we are going to deliver that, identify the gaps, and then work on achieving that over time. This is not something that's going to you can't just flip on the light bulb and expect things to change. It's got to be a process, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Sumit. This was really insightful. So one thing that I just want to call out is through this process, we've been talking a lot about the workforce experience and so forth, and building an employee value proposition. And Comp Team, we do have a tool to help you evaluate that. And part of our free gift to listeners out there today is this complimentary workforce experience scorecard, Pulse. And so what this is basically you just go into a tool and you'll enter in a lot of the answer a lot of questions about your current environment. It takes about 20 minutes. And then we'll be sending you the results of what that looks like for your company. And it will help with that gap analysis that Sumit was just talking about here in this rethink and then moving towards align. So.
Great. Well, excellent discussion, Sumit and Sam. So enlightening. And I think during this period, it's so useful for our senior business leaders, owners, and C-suites to really think about revising that employee value proposition. And as a small business owner myself, now I'm thinking, boy, what really was my employee value proposition before this period? But now more than ever, definitely need to sit down with my leadership team and create that. So thank you, Sumit, for your useful tips and advice. Very, very helpful.
One thing to add.
Thank you, Shar. Thank you, Sam. Sure.
Yeah, one thing to add really quick. There was that question that I think Howard Nisewitz and I believe somebody else brought up about, people just want to get employed. So is employee value proposition important? Well, as most recruiters would tell you, it's desperation is not necessarily the great person to hire for that particular role. It's very expensive for us to hire a person, train them up, and so forth. And if we're not ensuring that their values, their personal values, are aligned with the company values and customer values, then we can't expect that relationship to last in the long term. It's just like a romantic relationship, right? If you don't have those pieces aligned, it's going to be short-lived, and then you're going to be looking for another person once that person leaves your organization. So it's very important to ensure that values are aligned and you're hiring right the first time.
Absolutely. There's a lot of scrambling right now as we're trying to reopen, re-employ. So definitely something to consider. So excellent. Well, great. Well, I'd like to transition to our next speaker and talk with Brian O'Neill in regards to how leadership can develop programs that adapt to the new future, because I think now more than ever, we need to focus on our development. And now that our organizations may be changing their business models and strategic initiatives, now is an excellent time to be focusing on the development of our employees in regards to focusing on our clients and our customers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brian. Hi, Brian.
Hi there. How's it going, everybody?
Great. And do you have your audio or video up?
The host has stopped my video, so apparently I was not looking handsome enough.
No. Let me see if I can do that.
You have the coolest background out of any of us here, so.
Once we get the background up, you can see and interpret to yourself. See if we can get me on there. I'll try to and too.
Okay.
And I know Sam is working on that.
So the whole idea here. There we go. Now I'm getting a request. There we are.
Oh, and a beautiful sunset.
Yes, or
sunrise.
A sunrise. I think that's interesting because how you interpret that, this one picture also can be thought of as how we're interpreting where we're going in terms of this future normal, what some people call new normal, and so on. Are we heading to the sunset or are we heading into the sunrise?
Well, hopefully it's the sunset of the epidemic and the sunrise of the recovery. How's that?
Exactly. As Churchill said, the end of the beginning. This is, and you can go ahead and put the next one up. What I wanted to talk about with everybody today was the fact that actually some of these practices on how to handle leadership programs moving forward have been in existence at so-called progressive companies for a few years. And at a company I was at called Aimco, which is a real estate investment trust with 134 luxury and upscale apartment communities around the country, we began to look at this problem actually about 3-4 years ago. And so what I'm showing you today is a program that actually exists and it's in force at AIMCO today. And it's a nimble, agile program, and you can use the principles, concepts, and elements of it to think about how you can transform your leadership programs today in a post-COVID world as we adapt to kind of a new normal or a different normal. AIMCO has been a Denver Post top-rated workplace 8 years in a row, and depending on your definition of what a leader was within the company at the time, there were anywhere between 360 and 650 leaders geographically dispersed around the country. So Sam, taking the next slide, and we'll show you kind of what things looked like about 3 years ago within AIMCO for our leadership development program. This may look familiar to a lot of folks in the audience. This is a typical hotel conference space. You've got the banquet tables, you've got the facilitator in the middle, you've got a lot of folks up doing an activity because as we all know, face-to-face training is the highest fidelity training that there possibly is. And there are many advantages to that kind of training and that kind of environment. And I never want to not have that as a tool in the toolbox. But what's wrong, with this picture in the world of COVID? You take a look at this picture, and if we tried to take this right now, we'd probably get tweeted and Instagram to death about how, oh my God, these people aren't practicing social distancing whatsoever. There's nothing going on here. And sure enough, that's one of the problems. 30 people a year going through this particular leadership training program. You don't see all 30 in this picture, but they were brought in specifically for this leadership training. Remember, I said we had anywhere between 360 and 650 leaders in the organization. So if we continued this program the way it was, 30 a year, we'd be done by about the year 2038, not including turnover. And of course, you also see the costs involved. $12,500 per participant to bring all these folks in from around their geographically dispersed areas, hotels, dinners, the cost of the banquet room, the cost of sodas at a hotel, $6 for a can of soda, things like that. So you pay for this kind of high fidelity. And of course, in our environment post-COVID, you're also going to have huge concerns around the actual congregation of people. So what could we do?
This is what I think about when I look at this image, because I used to be in charge of talent management strategy and learning and development for a large healthcare system. And, oftentimes we do these highly expensive banquets, big resorts, extravagant catering. And unfortunately, it was focused on maybe a sliver of the leadership of the organization. And the concern I have in this new day going into the recovery phase is those essential workers are front. It doesn't necessarily need to be, quote, essential, but all employees deserve development and focus and support and coaching. Mm-hmm. So don't you think that this whole scenario is definitely going to be changing?
I hope so. Of course, I felt that I was a little bit ahead of the curve because one of the things I was advocating was the fact that, guys, when you look at it, leadership skills are not something reserved for the lofty towers of the vice presidents and above. We all lead at one point, one way or another. Even individual contributors need certain leadership skills. And if you boil down what leadership skills are all about, I've always said, just follow 2 rules and you'll have 80% of your leadership out of the way. And those 2 rules are, number 1, listen far more than you speak. And rule number 2, when you do speak, ask far more questions than you do make statements. If you would just do those 2 things, you will be well on your way to being much more of a servant leader than we have in companies today. And so a lot of the skills are listening skills, feedback skills, coaching skills, empathy skills. All of these are going to be extremely important in post-COVID world. And I agree with you. They're universal and therefore should be pushed to as many people in the organization as possible.
So wouldn't you say that a leader can learn so much from their employees, particularly in this time of recovery and adapting to the new normal and the new protocols that we have to follow with safety protocols? Would you not think that the employee would actually have a bigger mindset that perhaps the leader could learn from?
Mm-hmm. You're right. There was a former boss of mine who's one of their favorite phrases was, the answer's in the chair over there. Meaning that you need to find the answer not from within, not thinking that just because you have a position title or that you've had a certain number of years experience that you're, number 1, you know all the answers, or number 2, you're mandated to know all the answers. listening is so important, and finding out from the people who are actually performing the work and doing the job, what is it that's going to make it a good experience for you? And that goes right back to Sumit and his employee value proposition. It's got to come from the employees. So knowing, you know, in our case, this was pre-COVID, so cost was a major factor for us, but there are other reasons behind this. We said, what do we got to do? And so we created, you know, what everybody does in the world of learning and development, an RFP. We futzed and we putzed, and we came up with what we thought was the right criteria for how we could transform our leadership training programs. We did want to partner. We feel that there's so much content around leadership training out there that's so good that we wanted to partner with someone who had outstanding content. But we also needed a recognition of the fact that we were geographically dispersed, that our labor model was such that we had individual people. You know, the apartment business is very similar to the hotel business or other kinds of businesses that are geographically dispersed with units or properties or stores scattered around the country. We also needed alignment to our culture, our vision, and our values. And one of AIMCO's cultural values is driving innovation and change. So the company has for a long time been on the leading edge for all sorts of different practices. We wanted to make sure we were on the leading edge for this practice as well. And that would give us a best practice kind of leadership piece. But what I really wanted to do was go to next practice. Sam, if you'll jump me to the next slide, you'll see kind of the differences between how this looked. In our leadership programs around circa 2015, what you had was this simple linear thing, and I'm sure a lot of folks on the call would resonate with this. The leadership programs look like a module on something, listening skills, whatever, then module 2, then module 3, then maybe some kind of final thing that happens at the end, either a presentation to a bunch of leaders or some kind of test or something like that that happens. And then congratulations, you graduated. You're done with the leadership program. You know, go out and now go sell or do your service or do the things that you need to do. We got that out of the way. Very event-based. My sense was, you know, this was successful for AIMCO by 2019, was that leadership skills have to be thought of as a never-ending process. One of the biggest mistakes that leaders make is that if they accumulate a certain number of pieces that they're done, poof, they're a great leader. You know, we dub you a great leader. So what our partner proposed, you know, to us, and we agreed with, needed to be more organic in nature, flexible, dependent not so much on prescribed pieces as more of a continuing conversation, a series of modules that would continually be added on as a part of this leadership journey. We would look at strengths, areas of needs, priorities, what's next on the journey, and then of course link to the leadership competencies that we were creating at the same time. That's that kind of red, blue, green wheel that you see over on the left. I wanted the program to look more like the spaghetti diagram example that we're showing on the right, where the paths are different for different leaders in the program depending on their needs and what was customized for them. And then finally, certification, not graduation. I'm a huge fan of giving people certification as an adult, not graduation, because graduation implies you're done. Graduation implies you're finished. You don't have to do anything.
Right. And well, I personally have completed 2, quote, advanced leadership programs in 2 different healthcare systems myself as a participant. And I have this, quote, certificate now reflecting, not only coordinating these types of graduation step tiered events, that now more than ever with a new business strategy, the new models that may need to exist in the recovery phase of the COVID-19, I would think your approach here of looking not only at the senior leaders, but all employees is definitely going to be needed. So do you think that our leaders are in a state now of really having a new normal about development in general with this major shift in our paradigm?
I think the Josh Bersin blog indicates that many companies are beginning to switch now over and understand, gosh, if the paradigm is that we don't collect people, put them in a room and concentrate stuff that way, then it means other things. Then it means the second order effects and the third order effects are things like, hey, maybe this isn't just a 1, 2, 3, you're done kind of of peace for us anymore. Maybe this is something that we can create true collaboration on, where we can create more of a learning journey, a learning experience. So
Right.
hopeful. It's going to be interesting to see. I think it's going to take a good year or so to really see what's going on and see how this comes out.
Well, I would expect those organizations that truly sustain through this period will really embrace this new mindset around development of their teams, not only for new hires, but even their long-term employees and senior leaders as well.
Well, and I feel there's going to be a great reckoning a year, 2 years from now, where finally, when we get back to some reasonable semblance of normal, the workforce is going to look back and go, how did they take care of me? What did they do? How did they change? How agile were they? How much did they listen to what we needed based on everything that was going on? How caring of an organization are they? And I think the workforce is going to migrate to the ones who did an excellent job on that. And the ones who kind of stuck their heads in the sand and panicked are going to have repercussions in the next year or two.
Correct.
Slide
Absolutely.
just kind of shows the key elements of what I believe a next generation or next practice leadership development program should look like. Obviously non-traditional. There may be some chances for face-to-face, but you should probably use them more as opening and closing anchor points rather than 5 days all cooped up in a room together. Next generation leadership development needs to be aligned to whatever your cultural pillars are, whatever your values, your vision, and so on are. They should be primarily virtual or online, meaning that move as much as you can the learning about the skills, the practice around the skills, and the social collaboration that you can create using our tools these days to virtual or online. I really think any next generation leadership development program has to be self-directed. In other words, you know, it's the old joke of how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb really has to want to change. Similarly, how many leaders does it take to be successful in a leadership program? As many as you have leaders, but the individual leaders really have to want to be involved. They've got to have that desire. They have to have that innate motivation within themselves. So self-direction becomes extremely important because, let's face it, autonomy and the ability to delegate and the ability to understand oneself and have emotional intelligence, that's all part of being self-directed.
Well, Brian, wouldn't you think that the executive, CEO, the leader of the team would want to set the example? Because everybody, the president, senior leaders, everyone develops at all times. So as a senior leader, would I not want to exemplify that I'm also learning and developing during this period?
Yep, and we'll talk about that in a second because that's going to be one of the core things about this, that you have to have senior leader involvement, along with the personal accountability that's listed here. You cannot, as a senior leader, sit back and say, hey, this leadership development program, this looks pretty nice. This is great. Make sure all these other people go through it. I, of course, have been here for 25 years in this position. I've already learned everything there is to know about leadership development. I'm a great leader, so I don't need to be involved in that. Senior leader all the way up to the CEO is critical in order for these things to take root. Needs to be application oriented, meaning what we mean there is how are you applying the skills and knowledge once you get into the workforce? And what are you setting up in your design of the program to make sure you're capturing from people stories of how they have applied coaching skills or feedback skills or listening skills or situational leadership skills or motivation skills, whatever it is, in the actual workplace with a team member or with a customer. Tell us that story. That's one way that we created that, and we mandated that in order to get certification, that you had to be able to tell us a coherent story about how you actually use these skills and knowledge. And then finally, accessible to all. The idea that, again, just as from the top, we want to have top leadership involved. We don't want to have the frontline leaders excluded because, hey, they don't have manager in their title, or they don't have anybody reporting to them, so they're not really getting a lot out of this. True leadership is an influence process, and even as an individual contributor, you can influence really well by enhancing your skills around how to lead others, since it is an influence process.
Great.
Okay. Quickly, alignment to culture is important, whatever your whatever your company's mission, vision, values are. For AIMCO, there were 5 key cultural pieces here. And so what we decided to do was we named the first 5 modules in our leadership development program for these 5 cultural pillars. So with our partner, Ken Blanchard Companies, they were able to make that work for us. We didn't have to have a module on situational leadership 2 and a module on TrustWorks and a module on optimal motivation. Instead, we had modules on We Own It, and we create moments that matter, and we drive innovation and change. The one thing we knew we could not go back to, no matter what, and that's the next slide, Sam, was this model moving forward. That's the one thing we knew we had to do to go to next practice. Was we could no longer, number one, it was just a cost issue, but now in post-COVID world, with all the anxiety and all the worries about people traveling, it's probably going to be a year or 2 before people are at minimum comfortable with the idea of coming together face to face. And there's so many other advantages of going virtual that it's the right thing to do, even if COVID passes and we're no longer in this environment. So Sam, next slide shows Ken Blanchard Companies as our partner. There are several great quality companies out there that you can partner with. One of the reasons I like Blanchard was that Ken Blanchard really believes in servant leadership himself. And so the company doesn't have a lot of hubris. They want to expand and get their content out. They're not so worried about, hey, yeah, you can only show our program intact because we've built it and it's so perfect and it has everything to do with leadership that we want everybody to know. Instead, Ken Blanchard says, hey, if you need to part this out and put it under your umbrella of your culture and your vision so that it makes sense, that's great. And they're extremely good about customizing in that way, far beyond just saying, yeah, we customize because we put your logo on the front page of the participant guide for our program. Sam, show me the next one, and I'll show you where some of our inspiration for our leadership program came from. In our talks with our senior leaders about where this should go, and with our people who had been through the program in the past, where it should go, what did we want people to visualize when they thought of leadership? And the words that kept coming up were things like journey, ascents, climbs. Those came forward in our focus groups. And our senior leaders kept coming back to the word impact. AIMCO itself is a very results-driven company. It's not enough to provide leaders with good leadership skills just so they have them. They wanted to know the impact of their learning and using these skills on the job for their self-leadership, for their teams, and for the bottom line of the company. I was passing through the Westin Hotel at Denver International Airport, it seems like years ago now, and one of the artwork pieces they have in their elevator lobby is this piece, and it just reminded me of, oh gosh, handholds and footholds for climbs. Maybe our modules could be thought of as climbs, and that's where we resulted in our program, and that's the next slide, Sam, that we ended up calling it Leading for Impact. And Leading for Impact has this whole metaphor around rock climbing or climbing walls, always climbing. When a climb is done, you're off to the next climb. You never climb everything. There are too many mountains out there to climb, but there's always a new climb of some kind to be accomplished. So,
Well, I'm not a rock climber, but wouldn't you think that we need excellent anchors to hold our weight through our climb
we do.
in our development?
That's known as being on belay in the rock.
Oh, belay.
So stand by for that, because that's an extremely important piece as well, the anchors. Next slide, Sam, will show how, for an example, this was our vision of We Own It. So an overarching framework here, when you see the concepts within our vision of what our cultural pillar is, you see things like doing the right thing, making the right decisions, responsibility. Well, that gets into ethics, and that gets into trust. And so this is the basis, this was the content that we used from Ken Blanchard Companies to create this overall design. The next slide shows where we ended up with our visual representation of Leading for Impact, how we actually introduced this to people. Everybody goes through a base camp, which is essentially that anchor point where people get to understand what the program looks like. And then the first 5 modules are all listed down here based on our own cultural pillars. For example, under valuing relationships, the handholds or footholds corresponded to the subject matter that was covered within this particular session. 6 to 8 weeks to complete this self-study, an opening webinar of about 90 minutes to introduce people to the concepts and get them introduced to their cadre or the group of people going through the program with them. Then 6 to 8 weeks where you would have about 30 minutes a week maximum to go into the Blanchard Exchange program and look at these various topic areas. Watch a video, do an assessment, respond back through social collaboration. I'll show that in a minute. And then an anchor webinar at the end where people came back together to discuss how they were applying these things on the job.
Wouldn't you think, I love this visual, Brian, it's outstanding, at least from my perspective, but all these new social developments and all the transition that are going on, a leader really, executive leader really needs to think about the vision and the transition of the organization and the skills and competencies that will be needed with being more customer centric and safety focused. So wouldn't a leader really need to think about, I see here, if we're going up the, you know, the blue, you know, the valuing relationships and then moving over to the moments that matter. I mean, being able to move through those phases is going to be so key. And the leader really needs to be vision focused about what next step will the employee and leader need to take.
Right. Which means as a part of this, in order to set everything up, you have to have initial conversations with your boss to truly understand where you should go. This is not a prescribed kind of thing like old style leadership programs. Not everybody started with valuing relationships. The only thing everybody starts with is base camp to get a sense of the overall program. So in order to enroll or to get involved in this program, you first have to have agreement with your supervisor, which is a conversation with them. In our case, we were lucky enough to have true 360 assessments based on our own cultural values and so on about how we wanted our excellent leaders to operate. So you could have that piece as a conversation piece to say, hey, it looks like you're very strong in areas like our Moments That Matter pillar, which is all around customer service, but you may not be quite as strong based on what I'm seeing on the 360 from the We Own It piece, which was the ownership piece and the handling of autonomy and delegating tasks to others. So maybe you should start with that climb after base camp, whereas someone else might start with another one. And we never mandated that people should go through all of these first 5 modules anyway, because we said there's going to be more in the future. And some of them you may be so strong that you decide to skip that one and decide to spend more of your energy in some of the other clients. It became a truly customized leadership journey for each leader, depending on their own strengths as agreed upon with their supervisor.
Well, I love that you say that, because thinking that we own it, all of us owning that we all have room for opportunity and development, no matter what level or title that we have. We all have areas of opportunities and all have areas of strength. Lisa, did you have a comment?
I just had a question that I wanted to pose, and there's no raise hand function that I could find on this webinar function. Brian, how did AIMCO tie this development journey to their long-term succession plan in terms of like hypos and, you know, people who sort of figuring out who was going to get promoted or who wasn't? Was that sort of an integrated concept from the beginning, or just how did that all work?
Well, the 360 assessment helps us to identify high potentials at the beginning, which helps prescribe where people should go on this particular journey and which modules they should take in what order. Then we created a certification piece because we wanted to make sure that we had some kind of accountability for people who were really on the journey and doing well and indicating it. So certification became a way for AIMCO senior leaders to see who's taking the initiative here, who's really getting into this, because you needed a certain number. Essentially, we created it as a point system. You needed a certain number of points, which could be done by taking climbs, but also could be done by interacting on our social collaboration network or on our outside LinkedIn and Facebook channels. We created a way that people could show their leadership, and if they did to a certain extent, then they become certified. It didn't mean they stopped their journey. It just meant that they picked up a certification and then they continued learning as they went. And that was another way for us to help identify who the true high potentials were in the organization, the ones who were really looking at this. And then, of course, tied to their individual KPIs and their individual performance reviews.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I was really I was very struck. Well, I am here to say that the 1 to 2 year journey of no live training, I think that's probably right. And just, it's a stunning thought to think that, you're going to be going through these kind of experiences on Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's not no live training. That is live. It's just not face to face.
That's what I meant. I should, yes, right.
Total
Right.
high fidelity, right?
Well, and may I interject here? As an employer that's going through a rehiring phase, my organization is very face-to-face because we are dealing with the public. And so, although I might not have my leadership training face-to-face, we do have staff training to teach about the social distancing and the masks and safety and protocols. So next week we have a huge staff meeting and we're having to think about our social distancing and how we're going to do this training, and some of it will be online and some of it will have to be in person. So in my view, it might be a combination.
Oh, I agree. And other companies may decide, because we're geographically close, we have everybody in one office, and therefore we can run anchor points in a true live environment, but they're only, an hour and a half or 2 hours together instead of 5 days together. That may be another way that you can get towards a more.
Yeah, we're having face masks and where our seating arrangement will be, and do we have enough space for that?
Right, yeah. Absolutely. So one of the things we learned with this is that you need certain virtual online tools in order to get the job done. You need some kind of learning management system in order to make this work, because you've got to track and see where people are, understanding that we're expanding this out. It's no longer an event where we just track a single event, and when everybody completes that event, they're done. We have to track people across multiple climbs, understand what they're doing, see if they're eligible for certification, so on and so forth. Our third party Blanchard used Blanchard Exchange, which is it's a learning platform that includes very nice tools for showing videos, for completing assessments, for getting out to web links and completing the information there, which can then feed into the learning management system. And we also used Yammer as a social collaboration tool so that people could continue to converse and have an ongoing conversation with each other and stimulate some of the questions that normally occur face to face.
Right.
Excuse me, when you're in a conversation like that. So an example of that, Sam, if you'll click to the next one, you can kind of see what Blanchard Exchange looks like really quickly. This is what participants would see if they go into Blanchard Exchange, showing color coding out and whether they've completed a particular piece within a module or they still had things to do, gave them exactly, excuse me, a estimate of the amount of time it would take to complete a particular module. We set it up so that it would, online work would take no longer than 30 minutes a week. We set that as a standard because in pre-COVID environment, when our folks are being asked to be face-to-face with our customers constantly, it's kind of hard to get away for 30 minutes. In our new post-COVID world, you could probably have a much longer maximum time of people working online to allocate for these programs. This is the one for driving innovation and change, just to give you an example. The anchor webinars, that's the next slide, Sam, then were conducted using Adobe Connect. We used Adobe Connect a couple of years ago because it had the best feature suite to be able to conduct training among a group of, say, 12 to 25 people at one time with breakout rooms where people could converse and have those kinds of topics. And there were anchor webinars using Adobe Connect, one at the very beginning of the climb, one at the end of the climb. So people would come back together virtually. With Zoom now, most of those features are now incorporated into Zoom. You can do breakout sessions within Zoom. So there are more easier and cheaper tools now coming on board all the time to be able to do these. We would display videos. We would ask for conversation coming out of those. We would do activities, polling, all the things that you would normally do in a live ILT session we incorporated into these anchor webinars for each of the climbs.
You're definitely utilizing technology very differently these days. I mean, these are excellent, innovative opportunities that a lot of employers probably didn't want to take the time to really focus on. So that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And then another tool that we used, we had Yammer available to us as an internal piece. And so we had everyone up on Yammer in the individual cadres for each of the climbs. And this is an example from our Valuing Relationships climb. This is the one that had coaching skills embedded into it. And one of the activities they were asked to do as part of the Blanchard Exchange piece was to go out, essentially scavenger hunt or create your own pictures that would show a visual representation of what your coaching skills are like today, and then where you think your coaching skills can be in 6 months based on the climb that you're involved in. So we would get these sets of pictures from all the folks going through the cadre, and then of course the other cadre members would comment on them and say, hey, that's really interesting because of this, or that reminds me of a coaching episode I had. And it stimulated the conversation that way, because as you know, pictures are worth 1,000 words, and getting people interested in showing what they had and learning from others, and being able to ask questions in an asymmetrical format where there could just be a running conversation over that 6 to 8 weeks. It really encouraged a lot of fun in terms of interactions and postings. Yammer,
I love that idea, because surgical equipment is so vital. That team that supports the surgeon and the nurse is so incredibly vital. And oftentimes there's a hierarchical perception that the surgeon's at the top and the nurse is here and the surgical tech is here. But like this image shows that team cohesion that must occur for the safety of the patient, and that we all need to develop towards that. So I love that, the fact of pictures.
yeah, it was a really good example. We had so many of these coming through. It was really fun. And of course, these days there are additional tools that can be done the same way. Microsoft Teams, Google has some tools that can be used. So that, again, what's interesting is the online tools continue to become more available, easier to use, and cheaper.
Right.
Free in many situations. We also, as you mentioned before, we had to ensure that our senior leaders were on board with this, that we had impact for them. So we needed to prove that impact. And the research that came about for that, Sam, that'd be the next slide, would be, I found some research from American Psychological Association that essentially said that when people perceive that they have support from their leaders, from their immediate supervisor and those folks ahead, look at the high numbers who say that their employer values training, that they'll participate, and that they will stay because of development opportunities, versus those employees who are surveyed and claimed that they had no supervisor support. Those numbers really go down. This made an impact on our senior leaders, where they realized, yeah, a lot of this is perception and what we're saying, the message that we're giving to people, and how much robustness we're providing in our messaging about how this kind of leadership training is valued. The next slide shows some of the key elements for success for a special webinar that we did for all the senior leaders, because as you correctly noted, Tara, if you're on a rock climbing wall, there's usually somebody down there at the bottom, that's called the person on belay, who is helping you, making sure that you're climbing correctly, telling you where the handholds are, and catching you if you fall. What a great analogy for being a leader on belay, supporting the Leading for Impact program. And as part of that webinar, we told our leaders on belay, those senior leaders, we said, here's the things you can do. Provide coaching support. Be curious. That was a huge word for me. Senior leaders have to be curious. They have to have enough wherewithal to say, hey, what's going on with that program? How far are you on your climb? What have you learned so far? Tell me about that. Let's talk about that for a while. And of course, respect the 30 or 40 minutes that they need each week in order to complete the program. Invest a little time in the Yammer groups yourself. So we had senior leaders coming in and commenting on those so that the participants could see that the senior leaders were involved. Of course, recognize, and then the number one way we always told our senior leaders that you could be successful in being a leader on belay is be a role model and get into Leading for Impact yourself. And so we had 3, 4 of our senior leaders, vice president in the first wave, who decided to go through. this created some interesting conversations, because some of the senior leaders said, well, if I'm in there, is it going to put a chill on the rest of the participants? And our answer was, we'll facilitate through that. And then most of the climb is self-study. So they should not have that kind of chilling effect that you can sometimes have when you have a bunch of super bosses in the same class as a frontline leader.
Yeah, I think that definitely shows that if a leader can be vulnerable and authentic in their own personal development, be able to receive brutally honest feedback about the ways that they can improve, will definitely increase the trust levels of the organization. So I love that analogy.
And so remember, we decided to call the program Leading for Impact. This series of climbs, virtual blended learning, open to everyone. We needed to show impact, and this is the impact that we showed. That's the next slide, Sam. In the first year and a half, remember, we had previously been putting 30 people a year through our leadership development program. We had 179 people start climbs in the first 18 months of Leading for Impact. I mean, 6 times as many people as we would normally have in a year. It's even more now since I have left AIMCO. In the first 18 months, the voluntary turnover for AIMCO as a whole as an entire business was 22%. The turnover for those folks who were in Leading for Impact was 8.8%. There's a correlation there, and that's definitely an impact. But those people who are interested and involved in our leadership development program stay with us. And then finally, the big thing, of course, from AIMCO's point of view was, gosh, can we do something about the fact that we're paying almost $400,000 a year to bring 30 people every year into our leadership development program? The cost per person went down to $652 in the first 18 months, and continued to go down as more and more people joined Leading for Impact. Because once you have the sunk cost of the development cost, then the cost per person continued to go down. But that's a 94% decrease in 18 months. And so for us, that was a huge impact. These days, in the post-COVID environment, I think a lot of the impact will be seen around scores on employee opinion surveys about whether or not they're receiving the training that they think is valuable, how much the leaders have in terms of empathy and so on. And those things are measurable too. So you can probably find good impact if you decide to go in this direction regarding a next practice program where all of the elements of live training are there to a large extent, but it is done primarily in a virtual environment.
Well, I would think that these outcomes would definitely get the attention of our financial leaders, and those leaders really focused on operational outcomes. So definitely, it's not just an HR program. So I think those outcomes are phenomenal.
Absolutely. So that very quickly, normally I get 60 minutes for stuff like this because I love to talk. So I'm open for any questions or comments or anything.
Absolutely, this is phenomenal. And I know that Sam is also a rock climber. So all this language, I'm sure, Sam, you could relate to, right? And I think you're on mute.
Yeah, so you're right. I like to comment as far as having a Blair and anchors, those important things, because one thing that I've noticed in going into organizations in my consulting practice is one of the biggest failures companies do is they don't train their managers for proper communication, for having those hard conversations, for leading their people, developing their people. It's one of the biggest failures in a company. And so having a good program out there to train and develop your managers is essential.
Right. Well, I think in rock climbing or in some of those dangerous types of individual sports, I mean, that's a life or death situation, perhaps, if you can't, or we have difficulty with communicating and developing and supporting one another. In my view right now, many businesses, perhaps it's not a real life or death situation, but the business will not sustain and will not be able to thrive without this type of mindset about developing our people.
Right, and just the new ways of developing. I mean, I really like the the approach of competency development.
Mhm.
You know, when we're talking about the traditional career paths, right? When you go to I start in entry level and I go to step 2 and then step 3 and then step 4. It's so linear. And now in today's world, when jobs are fragmenting and we're thinking more about what a person can deliver to the role, we're thinking about competency development. And everybody has their own path and develops at their own pace. And when we give our employees, our workforce, a choice of, you know, what is the best way to be more productive and be more valuable to your employer, and through developing a series of competencies when they need them, and in a sense of what they call micro learning, I think that's a great new development in the area.
And to this point, Sam, Howard was talking in the chat about it, how critical it is to get buy-in up and down the organization. So Brian, you probably or others have a thought about this. You know, if I see this all the time in my work with the culture side, that if you've got top management aligned, that these are the competencies,
Right.
and, you know, the day-to-day managers or supervisors at the front lines are allowed to stray or do whatever they see fit, not being held accountable, it can create unwanted turnover, even if we have leaders at the top aligning to those values.
It's very true. That's why the communication of those values and the idea of this goes back to Aubrey Daniels, right? Measure of a leader. Consequences for behavior has to occur constantly. In other words, positive consequences for positive behavior. They have to be positive, certain, and positive, immediate, and certain, right? Picks and nicks, if anybody's been involved in Aubrey Daniels and how he describes consequences for behavior. And negative consequences have to be, if they're negative, they also have to be immediate and they have to be certain. What happens and what undermines organizations oftentimes is that the consequences for behavior, both good and bad, are usually not immediate. They're delayed, they're in the future, and they may be uncertain. In other words, sometimes some people apply them, others don't. Some people apply them differently. Then you get into a sense of hypocrisy. And so it's really important, and that's one of the leadership skills that I like to have in a leadership development program, is understand that you as a leader are being seen as a role model for everything that you do. And whether you know it or not, somebody is watching you. Somebody's seeing how you respond to things going on. And so how can you create an environment where you're giving constant recognition when you see positive behavior in the organization, and the consequences for that behavior are immediate and certain, that everybody knows that if they do well, they're going to get X, Y, or Z. They're going to get some kind of recognition. They're going to get some kind of praise. They're going to get some kind of tchotchke. They're going to get some kind of better score on their performance evaluation, whatever it may be. And secondly, if behavior is not occurring correct, that it's intercepted immediately and the consequences are known and certain. The consequences don't have to be you're going in the stockade for 5 days. The consequences can be, we need to have a conversation about this because I think we're not following our values, and I want to talk about that. I want to have that conversation. So yeah, if you're interested in that, just Google Aubrey Daniels picks and nicks, PICs and NICs.
And, you know, Sumit is weighing in. Do you want to speak to that, Sumit? Yourself, you just put this up in the chat. Senior leaders undergoing reverse mentoring would fit into what Brian is saying as well. I was just marinating on that concept a little bit, wanting to hear more from you about that one, because it's up and down the chain, that there isn't just mentoring happening one way up and down.
Correct.
It's happening more.
In a truly high-performing organization, if everybody knows what the values are and everybody understands them, then everybody's leading from the front. Everybody is influencing how the organization is moving in the right direction. Everybody's aligned. If you're linked, embedded, and aligned in terms of your culture and your values, then it reduces the chance that your frontline folks will see something and claim hypocrisy. That is typically what happens. I saw it in the chat a little bit earlier, where some of the comments that people going through a great leadership program will immediately say, my boss needs to go through this. What they're saying when they're saying that is, my boss doesn't follow these behaviors.
Yep.
You're teaching them to me, and I'm supposed to follow them, but how can I do it if my boss isn't doing it? Which is why you have to have both a top-down and a bottom-up approach to how the program works within the overall values of the organization and why it's important, and what the consequences are if we do this well, and what the consequences are if we don't.
Sumit, did that address what you were speaking to before we
Oh,
move?
absolutely. So that's, in fact, what Brian was saying made me think of reverse mentoring, because if a senior leader has the courage to admit that I'm at a senior position, however, I don't know everything, and I'm open to learning it from some of the younger and the newer folks in the organization, I think that'll prevent feedback like, my boss needs to attend that kind of training, because you're already opening yourselves up and saying, I'm happy to hear what I need to learn, and I'm more than happy learning it from you.
Yeah. One thing that I would add is, I mean, we're in a period, like we've mentioned before, of humanism, and ensuring that we have these tools, the right tools in place for the workforce. That you know, when you think of learning platforms of the past, it's something that's like, oh, what was that? How do I log into that? How do I get there? We need something that is, we need learning platforms that really enable the workforce, that managers in the workforce can assess in just-in-time manner. So they, you know, that for instance, you're going into an employee review and you're thinking, and the manager's like, oh, you know, it's been a year, or it's been 3 months, or a month. And what is the best, you know, things that, or how should I address this? And, you know, they can get refreshed. And the same with employees on how to manage up, or even, you know, like what Sumit was saying, you know, how do I recommend a training platform for my supervisor that may not know that he's being a little, or she may be a little caustic when she's having a conversation with me. And so, are there ways that we can have this in the platform to suggest training for our to manage up?
Well, it definitely seems like there's a new way of thinking about performance management in general.
Well, and talent management too, Shar, to your point, because what we're talking about here and what we've been talking about among us, you know, offline, is this idea that if you're in a human-centered workplace, or the human workplace, or there's a lot of conversations about people matter that are happening on this forum, that we have also the opportunity to start, you know, just as we have created really rich data sets for how we're leading change, or for how we're creating a new product, to decide whether it's something that has enough demand for the customer, or to reimagine certain aspects of our systems and processes. There's a huge opportunity to start thinking about, what if we had this rich data set about, you know, Shar is this certain type of leader that she's gone through all the certifications. She has one of the perfect personality sets for this team, you know, and start to become matching up people much more with their their innate talents and their innate drives, you know, of how they show up in the world, along with the skill sets that they've developed. And I just think there's a real opportunity for the people side of business to get a lot more customized in how you're putting people together in the leadership management roles, you know, not just to have it be, oh, you know, you've stepped up the ladder, now you get to be the VP, but moving people around according to where they're actually going to be able to have the best impact.
Absolutely.
Like having, you know, company LinkedIn for internal LinkedIn for like developing, you know, certain types of capabilities and skill sets and personality traits that really go with a certain type of situation. So
yeah, excellent points. Well, what I'd like to do is just do a conclusion summary, and I suggest that if there's follow-up dialogue and questions after my summary, let's go ahead and continue. But thank you so much for those of you that have attended today's webinar, our People Strategy Forum, particularly in time of recovery. And thank you so much, Brian and Sumit, for your excellent information in regards to the employee value proposition and how we're developing our employees in the future. It's been excellent. So I just wanted to mention to everybody, thank you for the participants that have attended today. We do keep a recording of this presentation as well as all of our prior presentations. I think we're on number 9 or 10 now. And you can find that at compteam.net. And please look at that information. You can always go back and listen to the recordings of our prior speakers. and then just really look at your organization and how you can apply some of these successful practices that we're presenting and sharing with you today. So there's a recording of the webinar. There's also hard copies of the slides that we share, all for free, and many additional resources. So for example, here you'll see that Sam is talking about the scorecard. Sam, can you explain what this slide is here, a free gift?
Sure, absolutely. So this is, like I mentioned before, this is a an offer that we're providing to all our listeners out there. If you want to learn more about how strong or what the gaps are in your employee value proposition, this is one way to start that process. Just go to compteam.net/WX scorecard and fill out the form there, and then we'll send you the assessment free of charge. You can take that when we'll send you the pulse gap analysis of that. So.
And I find that is very insightful. And actually, there's so many other presenters that also provided free gifts from our prior presentations. And I'm expecting those are still valuable. So please go back and listen to those. And then the other thing is, myself and my team have been tasked with finding future presenters, future speakers, future panelists. And if you are interested and find that you'll have an engaging topic that's very relevant and timely to this time, in this time and day of recovery, please reach out to us, any one of us, myself included, and let us know if you're interested, and we will set up a meet and greet and discuss those opportunities with you. And if you have any additional questions, please reach out to any one of us. Reach out to the connections, Sam on compteam.net and my team. We're all there, and our bios are there, so please let us know. And so I think that was mainly everything. I think we had an excellent session today. So at this point, I'll open up to any follow-up commentary.
Yeah, Jacques, just before we actually close, I wanted to say that we really have been listening to the people attending this forum on what kind of topics are the most of interest, where we want to drill in a little bit deeper on certain topics. And so you don't have to speak to suggest a topic if that's something that you feel a little nervous about or not confident or comfortable with that. But we really want to know how to produce this in a way that answers the questions that are most top of mind for you. So you can just pop them in the chat now if you know of one, or at any point just email us that, as well as, hey, I want to speak, I want to be a panelist. So
yeah, we do have speakers already getting scheduled as of right now for the next several months, but we do plan to continue this forum ongoing as a support and resource to our executive leaders. Absolutely.
So if anybody would like to, any of the attendees out there would like to join on that and show your video or or audio, just go ahead and let me know in the chat box, and I'll open this up to you.
I think people are signing off. That was your invitation to come and join, and they left.
Feel rejected.
Just kidding. I think that was happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so we're trying to keep everything very relevant. I think one of the big things, like Sumit was talking about, is given this market shock, looking back and how we're going to change how we communicate value to our employees and our customers as a whole. Really, this is a really good time to look at your employee value proposition, and how are we going to change or augment that to make this more meaningful to this new environment. I think one of the examples I brought up was the ensuring that you have the right tools in place. For communication is essential. You need to make sure that the business is operating with as much grease so everything slides around really nice and easy, so that it's not hard to get work done. And then, as Brian just presented, it's extremely important to ensure people have those new skills so that they can be successful in this new environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think often employers are sitting back kind of waiting for the development to start when we officially reopen or go back to normal. if you are in that state of pause as a small business owner, I highly recommend now is the time to really look at your employee value proposition and your development processes based upon what we learned today. I think now is a great opportunity. I certainly would say I'm thinking about what I'm going to do with my teams over the next week. So extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm attending today a really interesting forum on how to lead a great remote culture, which is done by a group of really progressive design thinking folks up in the Bay Area. So I'll be looking forward to sharing some of the lessons that I glean from that, because I've been my own self, you know, as culture being my specialty, which is the collective way in which people work together and lead. I've been very curious about how to translate that to remote world. You know, it's brand new. I mean, there's a lot of thinking that's gone behind it, but en masse, we've never done it really.
Yeah.
You know, I have had conversations with, you know, people in big enterprise companies that are trying to do agile teams across the globe, and you've got, you know, 12 different time zones that you're operating on, and how do you actually bring people into a sense of high performance when they've never met? And it's believed in that particular example that it's not possible, that we discarded the methodology because we couldn't get the actual people to feel like a cohesive team when they're not in a room together.
Right,
So
right.
lots to explore on that front, I think, you know, in terms of how we really create an environment in which remote work can be high performing as well.
Well, look, thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Sumit. And thank you, Sam. It sounds like we need to wrap up now.
Great conversation today.
Excellent. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day and the rest of your week. And we really appreciate your time and participating today. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.